Business notice of motion number 462, standing in the name of Senator Babet regarding excess deaths in Australia.
Senator Babet.
In March of last year, I asked the Senate to investigate excess mortality in Australia because it was at an all-time high, unfortunately, an all-time high. Now, that month, the Australian Bureau of Statistics estimated that excess deaths were more than 15% above the historical average. As I said at that time, it was equivalent to something like a giant passenger plane crashing every single week for a whole year. Yet, incredibly and unfortunately, the Senate refused to investigate this unexplained increase in deaths. Now, since then, the tragedy has continued. In 2023, 12,377 excess deaths occurred by the 30th of September. That's 9.9% more than the baseline average. So far, the ABS estimates that there have been 29,601 excess deaths from March 21 to August 2023. Every one of these deaths is a person who would not have died if it had been a normal year with a normal number of deaths. Just yesterday, I moved a motion to refer this issue to the Community Affairs References Committee. I gave all my colleagues in this place the opportunity to help us investigate the causes of our excess death rate. Now, sadly, my motion was defeated, and 35 of my fellow senators in this place, in my opinion, stood in the way of truth and justice for many people in our community. Now, this is a matter of life and death, but it seems that, unfortunately, many in this place would rather remain ignorant. The Australian Labor Party, the Greens, Senator Lambie, Senator Tyrrell, Senator Thorpe stood in the way of this inquiry and voted against it. It's shameful, in my opinion, and I must ask, what have you got to hide? What are you scared of? I would like to, however, acknowledge my colleagues from the Coalition, One Nation, and Senator David Pocock for supporting my motion yesterday. Thank you for doing the right thing. I'd also like to acknowledge the Australian Medical Professionals Society, aka AMPS, who have stepped up to the plate and completed the hard work that many of my colleagues in this place have shamefully refused to do. Last year, AMPS held their own inquiry in Parliament House. Now, their inquiry, it was aimed at addressing the overlooked crisis of excess mortality in Australia. The information they presented was sobering to say the least, but sadly, in their inquiry, the attendance by senators or their staff was appallingly low. They were unfortunately ignored by most in this place. AMPS have gone on to put their findings into a book which is bound to attract attention around the world, titled Too Many Dead, an Inquiry into Australia's Excess Mortality. All of my colleagues have been sent an electronic version of this. I urge you to read it and to be informed. Now, these Australians have taken it upon themselves to do the work that we should be completing here. The government should be doing this work. Yesterday, Minister Gallagher said that the government does not support my motion and reiterated that the ABS is the definitive authority of mortality statistics and data in Australia. I agree, yes, Minister, they are. They have identified a significant issue, but we should explore that issue. The Australian people are screaming out for answers. The ABS does not speculate as to why more Australians are dying of certain illnesses. That is our job in this place. Now, Minister Gallagher also stated that every death that makes up the total statistic is a personal tragedy, and she acknowledged the tragic impact of these deaths on the families and friends of those who have unfortunately lost their lives. Minister, these families, they deserve closure, and we must interrogate the causes to ensure that the trend of excess mortality comes to an end. In 2020, our country, our states were shut down to save lives. Every single COVID-related death was documented in regular reports produced by state and territory health departments. They were announced by premiers in regular press briefings. TV news stations ran ticker counts. COVID statistics became somewhat of a national obsession. Yet for thousands of Australians who have since died unexpectedly for unknown reasons, the people in charge have shown little concern or motivation to investigate, and the media have been largely mute. It is important to note that excess deaths didn't start in 2020, but in March 2021, at the same time as the rollout of the mRNA COVID vaccines. Now, correlation obviously does not prove causation, but it indicates that the COVID vaccines may have caused or at least contributed to some of these excess deaths. Now, we do know that these novel vaccines have injured and killed many people, but we won't know if there's a link to excess mortality unless we investigate. What we do know is that if the COVID vaccines were truly safe and effective, as we keep hearing, then there should have been no severe COVID in Australia and no excess deaths except in the tiny fraction of the population who were not vaccinated. But this isn't what we've seen. For example, the data released by the New South Wales Department of Health in 2022 showed that vaccinated people made up the vast majority of people who were hospitalised, treated in the ICU, and who died. Unsurprisingly, New South Wales stopped publishing this data that didn't fit with the official mantra that the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines are safe and effective, and that's just not good enough. What we did see is that once the Australian people were highly vaccinated at the start of 2022, Australia opens its borders and COVID cases and deaths exploded. Not only that, for every single month in 2022, the age standardised rate of death was higher than in any of the preceding 3 years. Now think about that, it's incredible. This was the Omicron wave, which was not as lethal as earlier variants, yet highly vaccinated Australians who expected to be protected by the COVID vaccines suffered extremely high excess mortality. We know that the COVID-19 vaccines cause heart inflammation. We know that. Myocarditis, pericarditis. And we know that heart inflammation can pass undetected and can be fatal. So it's disturbing to see that while deaths due to coronary heart disease have fallen, deaths due to other cardiac conditions, which includes deaths due to heart inflammation, increased by 13% in 2022 and 12% in 2023. Other areas of concern are dementia and diabetes. Deaths from dementia increased by 17% in 2022 and by 11% in 2023. Diabetes deaths were up by 20% in 2022 and 14% in 2023. There has also been a disturbing increase in cancer in 2022 of 6% and 7% in 2023. Where has this spike come from? We need to find out. Now, we owe it to all Australians, especially the family and friends of the almost 30,000 Australians who died prematurely since the start of 2021, to find out what is causing Australia's tragic rise in all-cause mortality and to do everything we can to put an end to this dangerous trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Babet. Minister?
We'll just indicate, Acting Deputy President, the government does not support this motion. And in fact, much of what sits behind this motion is an assertion that there is data that is unavailable to the public, that there is data that is for all sorts of motivations that are impugned by the characters who share this sort of stuff on social media is not being made available for all sorts of nefarious purposes. And of course, for the people who spend a lot of time in this place late in the evening on the socials, posting things that are true and things that are untrue, often with a disregard for evidence and science and the institutions that are there to analyse and disseminate the data. Of course, I'm sure that there are some people who do that who honestly believe what it is that they say. Probably a few of those. There are some who know it not to be true, but say it anyway because it's a well-worn tactic of people who seek to propagate radical right-wing extremism. And there's some who've gone through a bit of a journey themselves, who started doing it for those reasons. That is, they latched onto these things as a way of organising the maximum possible position for their political position, even if it was things that they knew to be untrue, have subsequently, in a process of self-radicalisation, I think, begun to believe that they are true. And I've seen some evidence of that in this place. It's the kind of process that we've seen in many parts of the world, of this kind of thinking, this kind of conspiracy theory thinking, bereft of the benefits of the last few centuries of scientific discovery since the Enlightenment, and are using those for a very narrow, very nasty set of organising propositions. Because of course, where there is an event like a global pandemic, it is of course a frightening event. The Spanish flu caused untold misery, untold deaths around the world. 19 million deaths in Europe, more than the Great War. When you tell the history of my family in this country, there was, in the space of 1 week, in the town of Uralla, where a relative of mine, his daughter and his granddaughter, all died of the Spanish flu over the course of just 1 week in their home. And, you know, can you imagine? It's not imaginable for us here in Australia, where we had the benefits of a health system. We had the state and the Commonwealth governments working, not perfectly, but working to deal with the challenge. We had people able to attend hospitals. But remember the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was no certainty that a vaccine would be developed in time, and people were frightened. And some people in the political system, of course, where they see fear, they see opportunity. Where they see a capacity to divide people and to isolate them and to frighten them, that is an opportunity. We've seen that in other phases of our history. It will happen again. And it certainly happened around the COVID-19 crisis. And some of the things that were being shared on social media in particular, the sorts of things that were the preserve of the funny characters who you would find. When I was growing up in country New South Wales, there was the League of Rights. They were the far right organisation. They made efforts at at organising. They made efforts at making incursions into political parties. They did their best. They were the jackboot crowd. They were the jackboot crowd in regional New South Wales and regional Queensland in particular. And they'd be handing out the little leaflets outside the show, or outside the markets. Where there were bookshops, occasionally they would be found. Senator Smith, that's right. And it would be all of the conspiracy theory stuff of the age. Much of it with an anti-Semitic overtone, I have to say. Very regrettably. People who did not, Australians who did not understand the moral weight of what it is that they were doing. And we laughed at those characters because they were isolated and all they could do was hand out something that they'd run off on the Gestetner in some lonely garage somewhere and been posted around through Australia Post. And they would be there at those events. I have to tell you as an aside, colleagues, that the Glen Innes show is on this weekend where I grew up. It's a fantastic agricultural show. I urge Senator Scarr and Senator Rennick and others making their way back to Queensland, do it by road, go through Glen Innes, the Glen Innes show, Glen Innes, Mayor Barham, I am not going to be in the wood chopping competition. I'm not going to be in the bull riding. I won't be in the smash up derby either. I will be in none of these things, partly because
Sorry, Minister, just resume your seat. Senator Rennick.
Point of order relevance, Chair. I think we've got someone filibustering for time here. Can we just get to stay on topic, please?
Senator Rennick, there is absolutely no point of order. If I could impose that penalty, I'd be looking a lot younger after the years I've been in here and what I've listened to. Minister, you have the call.
And we would have all gone home quite some time ago if Senator Steele was really in charge of the timing of these things. But it's a fantastic show. My point, getting back just to make my friend Senator Rennick happy, my point, of course, is that times have changed. Times have changed. And it's no longer the preserve of people handing out little Ronioed notes distributed from some garage somewhere in the League of Rights headquarters or wherever. Anything can be said on social media. We see deep fake material being sent out. We see assertions being made which sound like they are true, but are in fact not true. Things that are generated overseas in countries that don't have the best interests of Australians or Australia at heart. In the countries, anti-democratic countries with which we don't share values, adversaries in fact, in meme factories, generating what I understand are called bots, who share the material on and share the material on, material that is completely untrue. But if you follow a straight line from that material back to the anti-Semitic, nasty, all the conspiracy theory stuff that was being shared by the League of Rights crowd and others, there's a pretty straight line. There's a pretty straight line. And what is it that it's our responsibility in this place to do? It is to tell the truth, to support the science, to make sure that governments and this place act with transparency, to do it with confidence and to not be distracted by the efforts of some, not just on the crossbench, but some within the opposition parties here, who seek to take the utterly rational questions, utterly rational apprehensions and fears that that ordinary Australians of course have when there is an event like a global pandemic. There's a pretty close relationship between pandemic denialism and assertions about vaccines, assertions about the availability of information, and climate denialism, quite frankly. It is all in the same continuum of political activity. And people on the other side, I know many good people, wouldn't vote for them in a pig fit, but many good people are doing their best to stand up against this kind of conduct. But I just say, now is the time to be firm and resolute and don't be worried about your pre-selections. Don't be worried about the hard right. Don't be worried about the thuggery. Assert what is in the public interest and what is in the national interest. And of course, the truth here is that the Australian Bureau of Statistics collects all of this data on mortality statistics and all the related data in Australia. And there are regular publications of that data. Provisional mortality reports are published monthly and every second month as a way of updating in the most transparent way possible. Deaths in Australia updated annually, and excess mortality reports published twice yearly. Now, any person, any researcher has access to that data. The trick, of course, with data is you've got to have the skills, you've got to have the academic background, you've got to have the research capacity to be able to interpret it intelligently and to analyse it properly and to report on it in a way that is true and ends up being truthful. And that is of course one of the problems here. You can take any bit of material and produce the kind of material that's been generated by some of those on the other side of this argument. It's published online, it is available to every Australian. It's used by researchers, by government departments, agencies like the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and it's reported in reputable publications. By actual academic journals that have standards, where people require doctorates, not out of cornflake packets, but doctorates that come from reputable universities, and they provide analysis that should guide public policy making. Where there are problems, they should be transparent. But that's what should guide public policy making. In their analysis, the ABS has compared the number of deaths which have occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic to the number of deaths expected based on historical trends and adjusted population changes. Includes deaths from all causes and not only those related to COVID-19. While death rates and causes of death are key indicators of the health status of a population, it's important to remember, of course, that every death, behind that sits a personal tragedy. Behind that sits very often misery for a family, and they should not be the subject of political manipulation and grandstanding and nasty organising.
Thank you, Senator.
Kind of party.